We have a Neuvillette rerun incoming, and naturally the big question is, should you get him? And despite the fact that he is a very old character from Fontaine, I still would lean towards the idea of saying, yeah, I think you should get him. Because, well, he seems to be really good still. And hell, even Hoyo has got so far as to give him a brand new outfit, even though it looks a little bit like his old outfit. I kind of just wish the Melusies would actually, make his outfit a different color to his old outfit so that we have some more variety to play with. Only 7 of the 21 themed outfits in the game actually offers players a different color to choose from, such as Purple Rose Lisa versus Sumeru Academic Lisa. But enough about outfits. When it comes to Neuvillette, he is of course an on-field Hydro DPS, and being an on-fielder does make it a bit more difficult to recommend, as he does lose out on some overall versatility. But Neuvillette is one of those characters who can basically make a team with almost any combination of characters for the most part. That team might not be quote-unquote good, but it'll probably work with him more or less. However, if we start talking about whether or not he's strong enough and all that kind of meta stuff, I have been thinking about something that I suppose people might want to call the big 3 with regards to Hydro on-fielders. You've got Neuvillette, you've got Mualani, and surprisingly enough, you even have Columbina herself. Now, what's hilarious is that all 3 of them are mages, which is an odd coincidence, I'm sure, but in the meantime, there is a comparison that I would like to make. Mualani teams, according to the spreadsheet impactors, tend to be stronger than Neuvillette teams, but Mualani herself can be a far more difficult character to play than Neuvillette. In my experience, the Mualani teams seem to be a smidge weaker, so this might be an investment problem, at least from my part. On-field Columbina seems to be a bit stronger than the various Neuvillette teams you can play, but there is only one specific team where I would play on-field Columbina, and that is actually in a Nilo team. I'll talk about that later on in a different video. So it seems to me that Neuvillette can fit that sweet spot between being very versatile as an on-fielder at least, and whilst doing a decent but not meta-breaking level of damage these days. But between the big 3, he's certainly the most comfortable option, so if you're not trying to sweat it out and do as much damage as you can to try and clear something like, I don't know, Dire Stygian for example, whilst being free to play, then it does seem to me like Neuvillette is in fact the way to go. That being said, some people have called his gameplay boring, and I can see where they're coming from with that, but I do not share that assessment. I still enjoy playing him from now and then, just as I enjoy playing quite a lot of characters. There's just a very huge roster, so I don't necessarily play anyone in particular a lot. But if you don't feel like you enjoy the way that he plays, if you don't particularly like his playstyle, his gameplay loops, then I feel like that might be all the reason you need to basically skip Neuvillette. So that pretty much concludes my opinion of the state of Neuvillette in the big 26. We'll see if he gets another rerun this year, but before we continue the usual shenanigans in these kinds of videos, I just want to remind you all that if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's start off with what's new. Neuvillette's last rerun was in version 5.2, and since then a lot of characters have shown up that are in fact really good for him. No surprises there. Citlali can be a shielded replacement if you're comparing C0s, especially in a forward Vape Neuvillette team. Mavuika and PMC can work as great off-field pyro options. Lanyan is apparently a very strong shielder. I have no idea how she works. The spreadsheet impactors seem to love the Neuvillette freeze teams with Escoffier, despite them being completely antithetical to his A1 passive, unless of course you're going up against something that can freeze but also trigger another reaction somehow. Ineffa can of course bring Lunar charge to Neuvillette teams. Lauma can of course bring Lunar bloom to Neuvillette teams, and she can also be another option for some Hydro Red Shred. Ino is an option if you need that extra Hydro and you also want to do Ascendant Gleam shenanigans. Yehoda is also an option, again, if you need that extra Hydro and you want to do some Ascendant Gleam shenanigans. I don't think there's any Neuvillette team where I would bring Durin though. Support Durin doesn't actually do anything for Neuvillette. DPS Durin is very single target focused compared to Neuvillette, who is typically very AoE focused actually. And Columbina is an off-fielder, is actually a very good option, but only with either Lauma or Ineffa or both in these kinds of teams. So when it comes to teams, there's usually 2 that I would play the most, and then the rest are options that you can find floating around in the community on various online forums. The Neuvillette team, even to this day. We've got Neuvillette, Shillanen, Kazuha, and Farina. This is the most straightforward maximum Neuvillette damage team that I can make in the game because of the various investment levels that I have. typically we can swap out Kazuha for an off-field DPS. For example, we have Ineffa, Miko, Dahaya, Shangling. Although for the Electro options, you might even want to swap out your C0 Shilladin, since it's harder to get Hydro Crystallized from Electro or Lunar Charge auras, thus reducing the effectiveness of something like a Scroll buff. Now, normally, with these double Hydro teams, we end up with 2 Draconic stacks, which means only 25% total charge attack damage instead of the maximum plus 60% total charge attack damage. But Farina tends to make up more for this and then some. There are also ways to get that final Draconic stack. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Ascendant Neuvillette. Now, this is a team that's actually rather new because we have Neuvillette, Lauma, and Ineffa. Now, you can bring Farina if you want, but I would say that Columbina is a bit better in this team, although I am, of course, comparing my Columbina, so investment levels are a little bit different there. Strangely enough, though, it is still similar DPS to the Neuvillette team, at least for me, so I guess the Neuvillette team with my investment levels seems to be really, really good. Freeze Neuvillette is a team that has been floated around by the Spreadsheet Impact players with Neuvillette, Escoffier, Citlali, and Farina. You can see why I'm not a particularly big fan of this team. Forward Vape Neuvillette is also a team that I've talked about before with Neuvillette, Citlali, Nahida, and Mavuika. This team can easily get all of your Draconic stats without any Constellations. If you don't have Citlali, Layla has worked pretty well as well, but then the Pyro option would have to be someone else. Durin is a bit odd because he'd be buffing Burgeons that don't do as much damage unless you build fully of Durin, or Nahida, who's also not going to be doing all that much damage in this team, so at that point you could potentially run Emily instead of Nahida. That would be the alternatives that I would go for. And then finally there is of course Random Bullshit Go. Neuvillette and whoever you have pretty much will do the trick for the most part. Building Neuvillette is actually incredibly straightforward. There have been some new options that you can play around with if you want to think a little bit outside the box. For weapons, as always, Tome of the Eternal Flow remains his best in slot, but if by some sheer dumb luck you have Columbina's signature but not Columbina, that also happens to work for him in Lunar teams. Surf's Up is a pretty decent 5-star stat stick, otherwise Lost Prayer could also be a 5-star weapon you could use. For 4 stars, I would say that Sacrificial Jade is the only Battle Pass weapon worth using on him. You would have to break up his part of a rotation a little bit in order to retain the weapon passive. Dawning Frost is a relatively newer event 4-star option. If you manage to get it to R5, it is actually very strong in those Lunar teams, specifically Lunar Charge teams, but also Forward Vape Neuvillette would like this weapon a lot. Otherwise, if you're out of options, Prototype Amber is pretty much the only other choice worth thinking about, and you're mainly using it for the HP substat. You don't really need it for the team-wide healing, but I suppose in the Neuvillette team you could use that as well. For artifacts, just stick with Marechaussee Hunter. It's pretty much designed for him. If you haven't gotten a build set up for him yet, then you can actually farm other sets for other characters, and then in the meantime you can use the Strongbox to process your dud artifacts in the hopes of potentially rolling some great Marechaussee artifacts. But if there's nobody else that you're interested in at all and you just want to build Neuvillette, you can actually do some really hardcore farming by, of course, farming in the domain, but then also processing your dud Marechaussee artifacts to potentially get even better Marechaussee artifacts. And if you're going to do that, then you would actually be very efficiently farming for the Neuvillette team by farming Marechaussee for Neuvillette and Golden Troop for Farina. And if that's the case, then in the meantime, you could use the DPS Nordcry set if you happen to be playing a Lunar team. And barring that, 2-piece HP, 2-piece Hydro build is really just there if you're truly desperate. For artifact stats, HP Hydro Crit is usually the way to go, but depending on the team, you could get away with an HP Cup or hell, even an HP Hat. Thankfully, we have the Simulacrum now, so you can always test out your pieces if you happen to have 2 very strong options to choose from. And finally, we have Neuvillette's Constellations. I still maintain the position that you don't need them at all, but I suppose there's now some merit to getting his C1. C1 does give you a free Draconic stack, which means you'll get the full plus 60% total charge attack damage even in something like the Neuvillette team. And whilst that is something that I would say is worth getting, I'd still suggest against it because part of the excitement of playing the Neuvillette team is fighting enemies and finding ways to somehow get that final Draconic stack. For example, we have Neuvillette's Shilling Stygian Onslaught boss of the Crab, with Pyro Shields that gives us that sweet, juicy final Draconic stack. Or alternatively, and this is what I would call a prime example, getting Kazuha to be hit by some Pyro damage, then using a Pyro-infused ult that can regularly apply Pyro onto enemies, thus triggering or even setting up some Vape reactions, thus giving us that final Draconic stack. C2 on the other hand is a big crit damage increase that usually results in an HP hat performing better than a crit damage hat, especially if you pair him with his tome as well. C3 is normal attack levels, C5 is ult levels, both of them are very useful. His ult is considerably less useful though, but I would still say it's pretty good. Personally, I've seen his ult do a 100k hit, so that's quite nice. Keep in mind I have triple crowned him though. C4 is an additional source water droplet every 4 seconds. This is definitely not a place to stop with Neuvillette. I kind of only see his C4 as a stepping stone towards his C6, where you don't need to regularly reactivate his charge attack in order to keep attacking. You can just keep hosing enemies. You also get to do some additional damage with some extra hits. That's basically the gist of it when it comes to Neuvillette. Didn't feel like I needed to go into too much detail this time because he has existed since a while. And there's a lot of guides out there for him already. Hell, I've even covered him a few times already in this kind of video. So, look, frankly, my build for Neuvillette hasn't actually changed one bit for a very, very long time. I'm still using the same weapons, same artifact sets, hell, same artifacts, quote unquote. So he remains a pretty, solid option, even though his place in the middle has been getting taken over because of the unending, relentless power creep in this game. So, it is what it is. But he's still pretty good. I think that'll do it for today's Neuvillette guide. Let me know what you think about all this in the comments below. Are you getting Neuvillette in the big 26? Let me know in the comments. Hell, if you already have Neuvillette, has this power creep made you heavily consider getting one of his constellations? Maybe? Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more Genshin Impact action. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Into the wind.